Hello and welcome to the Pause podcast. And today we have another fantastic guest, Colin here. He was working with me on the fantastic Indiana Jones 5. We'll go into a bit more detail about that on a different podcast. But today we're going to be talking about his top five films. How are you today, Colin? You well?
I'm grand and fantastic. Not long back from the Glasgow Film Festival. Just
Great,
you,
great, great, great.
what?
We're going to talk a bit more about the film festival probably next week once it's over. Some of the great films that you've got to see, and some of the actual good talks as well. You said there was James McAvoy. That was a good talk this evening.
Yeah, it was very down to earth, humorous Scotsman. No, and just still humble even after the career he's had.
Fantastic. Well, we'll find out a bit more about that on another podcast. But today, how we start out with every podcast with guests, what are your top five films and why?
Okay. So I mean, my top five, top 10 can shift quite frequently. And before I got on this podcast, I was sort of trying to establish what my current top five are. Now,
Yep.
this is generally a list that is it's flexible, fluctuates, it's very fluid. It can move about. I will say that my top one never changes. It's pretty much always at the top. And the others. It's all to do with like what I see as what was the top five cinema experiences. And I don't necessarily mean I was lucky enough to be alive or be present in the cinema when these initially came out, but this idea that like I can separate because you always have like your top favorite by taste and top by because I'm a big Star Wars geek, so I mean I don't sugarcoat that, but like none of my top five have any of the Star Wars films in that list
Okay.
because I justify the top five as like where when I went to see it, whether it be in the cinema or will it just be at home release, it was some sort of transformative experience for me, and
Hmm.
and it's all five of them tend to be ones that just have that rewatch value, and anytime I rewatch them, there will be little things that I never noticed before, things that I discover, or even if stuff that I knew was there, I just kind of fully appreciated it more. Um, and I wouldn't. I'm not going to say that they're like all five or maybe on a lot of like top lists. Like Sight and Sound have their sort of canon list of films, and then you'll get like, the Roger Ebert type critics all giving their tops and things. Like
Okay.
one or two of them may have at one time or another been on some of these lists, but like for me, if I think when you have to choose your top favorites, it is really subjective to a degree. Like you can't argue the fact that a film that's transformative for you isn't going to be isn't necessarily going to be transformative for another person, especially
Yeah.
and there is that element of like there's probably several films of the international foreign language category that I haven't given the time of day. So I mean a lot of them will be Western films. Say for one, there's one that is actually technically a foreign language film.
Okay.
And like, but again, I still justified including it because it was the transformative experience that it gave me. And that's actually the first on my list. So I'll start with the top, essentially my fifth one. So
Sure.
my fifth one for me is Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth from
Ooh.
2006. And like, you know, it was, I mean, it's fantasy, and a lot of the films I've liked in the past growing up were fantasy based, had that kind of folklore quality to them. And I think, the fact that it was a foreign language film, it wasn't that off-putting for me, really, because when I went in, you're sort of taken away with this idea, the context that there is a folk tale within that tale, and then and
Mm-hmm.
then and then they sort of set the the tone with that folktale before you're then thrown into this Spanish Civil War context. There is a historical element to it, even though the characters are all made up.
Yeah.
And I already knew what Guillermo del Toro's work was like. Like he's got a very, very obvious visual style and cast
Mm.
costume design and makeup design. And in the past the verged on horror at times. And like there is some moments in that film where, you're led down the garden path. Quite literally, you're sort of thinking, oh, folklore, fantasy, folklore, fantasy. oh my God, it's a horror moment. This is all of a sudden it's become a horror. Like, oh, there's Doug Jones, his usual collaborator in
Mm.
the monster role. And but then it then pulls itself back. Like it still reminds you that it's a fantasy tale, and like the stars of it were fantastic. I can't remember the girl's name. I think it's Ivana Baquero. I think she was
Hmm.
a really captivating child star. And I also remembered really enjoying, and I don't think he actually got nominated for anything anywhere, but the guy, I think it was Sergi Lopez, played
Okay.
the played Vidal, who's like her stepfather and like a one of General Franco's sort of top guys. He's basically one of the most horrible on-screen characters you could ever have. And like
Mm.
I mean, I probably have a separate list that has top 10 villains, and he might not necessarily be in the top 10, but like I think he arguably was more deplorable and despisable than any of my top five villains. Like I haven't, just I just thought like you really did root for everybody except him, but at the same time, his performance as that villain was sucked you in so well that I just think I hated him, but I loved that performance that he brought. And I think it was just the idea that the film straddled so many different boundaries. It was fantasy, it was folklore, it was horror, it was drama, and it was done very subtly. And
Mm.
another thing, for even the experience of going, because I was lucky enough to see it at the cinema at the time, and it was the sound design was amazing. And anytime I've ever rewatched it in home video, it's always come with a really good DTS, like 6.1. I think the newer ones have got a 7.1 surround, and it literally is the surround.
Cool.
And this was pre Dolby Atmos days that like there wasn't many other films that had that captivating soundscape, So there's so many things about it that I just still speak to me to this day, because it is on that kind of five, it's on the cusp. Sometimes it does slip back up into the, highers like higher tens, but very rarely is it out of my top 10. But I think at the moment I would definitely class it as like my fifth one.
Cool.
Um,
Number four.
so are you going to do yours, or is it just mine you want
Nah,
to hear
just
from
yours,
just
man.
now?
I've already
Right.
heard mine.
Yeah. So the other one does tend to stay in my top five, but and then occasionally it will get as high as two or three. And
Hmm.
at the moment it's probably my fourth choice. And that's Sidney Lumet's 12 Angry Men from
Oh, brilliant.
1957. And for me the it's the opposite effect of Pan's Labyrinth and some of these other grander choices that are in my top five, that it's such a simple concept and it's set in one little kind of courtroom, jurors room
Jury room.
location,
Yeah.
and it's the idea that like, and when I first saw it, it was my dad had already raved about it. Like he grew up with it. He was maybe 2 years old when it first came out, and then I think like he probably then saw it in TV and syndication after that, and he made a big deal about it, and then we just sat down and watched it one afternoon when I was maybe, I don't know if I was in high school or maybe just left high school. I was doing the film and television course and at Glasgow Uni, and I could see what he saw, and it's just the performances carry that film. And then you read up on it, and there's theories going about that Henry Fonda's character might even be the real criminal, and he's actually just turned up like he's the real criminal, and then the guy that's basically potentially in line for the electric chair for having done the crime is actually
Mm.
a scapegoat. But the bizarre thing is he might be the criminal who secretly turns up to the juror's room, and then his mission to convince every single juror to let off the kid that essentially gets charged. Well, doesn't end up getting charged. I mean, like spoiler alert, he's successful. He gets all
Mm.
the jurors can they change their pleas, but it's what the camera does. The cat often when one juror at a time is under scrutiny, the camera will go really close, like uncomfortably close, like a close, not necessarily extreme close up, but certainly close up, and to
Back
the
on an angle as well.
point, and then face on a lot of the time. Sometimes it's really face on, and you can see the sweat
Mm.
on some of the characters' faces as Henry Fonda's scrutinizing their theories and picking full holes in it. and it's really, I guess I wouldn't be surprised if psychologists, psychoanalysts would love that film, would probably see that as their top film because I mean, in a lot of ways it is a psychoanalyst wet dream when you actually see the reactions of these people,
Mm.
and then a lot of these actors as well have had staying power, like they've had big careers, like Ed Begley Jr.'s dad's in it, the guy that's a sports fan in it, I can't remember the actor's name, but he I remember him as the grandfather in the Problem Child films, the really bad Problem Child films, which are sort of like a sort of not a poor man's Home Alone, one of those type films. And
Yeah,
then
they're all character actors in there. They're
I
all
and
people.
and one and then the wee guy, the guy with the high pitched voice is actually the original Piglet voice as well. Like there's a real mishmash of people, and then obviously there's a Martin. Is it Martin Balsam? And he was in Psycho. He was the Arbogast. And like, even though obviously Henry Fonda's the star, I thought every one of the 12 jurors in it all had this amazing presence and this amazing face to capture in that kind of close up way. And it just was, it really stuck in my mind, and it still does to this day. So like for that reason, it's probably never going to come out in my top five, even if the numbers go up and down. And it is kind of the only one on my list that qualifies as a really black and white. It's the only black and white film that will be in my top five, I think, in perpetuity.
Sure.
So
What's number
it's
What's number
well,
three then for you? Because that's a good shout. Good strong
yeah.
entries there.
I'm gonna go for an obvious one for number three, and sometimes this is a funny one because sometimes it can come completely out of my top five and go way off because I'm just not in the mood for it. But then it's just I've got a kind of it's got a little kind of soft, squidgy place in my heart, even though it's an 18 rated film, and that's
Okay.
Pulp Fiction. Like Tarantino's get his trademark style, and that some people say that the superior one might even be Reservoir Dogs, and a lot of time I do think that the story of Jackie Brown is a lot better, but
Mm.
I just think Pulp Fiction hits so many beats for me. And when you wish you could be in control of like the award season that the year that a film was out, I just feel as if Pulp Fiction deserved every Oscar possible. Like even the soundtrack, like the soundtrack was kind of with that idea of like being popular music, and I know that popular music can't count as a as something that can get an Oscar for soundtrack, but I just felt
Hmm.
that the use of Al Green's "Let's Stay Together," and you're basically just staring at Bruce Willis, not saying a word, and you're hearing Marcellus Wallace, Ving Rhames speak the entire time,
Mm.
and it's just and the music it underscores it so perfectly, even though there's very little action in it. And yeah, and I know that Tarantino's used that style in a lot of his later films as well, where he can kind of film nothingness, he can film not much going on. There might be something really capturing your attention in the audio track, will it be the music, or in this case, it would be the voice of the lead actor, or not lead actor, but the main person you can
Yeah.
hear in that. And then yeah, there's so many great set pieces in it. There's the dance, there's the 50s diner dance, which everybody oft repeats, and then
Yeah.
the violence. And I would say like out of all the films, the violence isn't too over the top in that one. I think like that's why I kind of it's a kind of soft, squidgy place in my heart that like really it's nowhere near the grotesque kind of glorified versions that he does in his later films. And I think Pulp Fiction is just stylish. It's a very stylish film. So funny at points, like just really,
Mm.
really hilarious. And then obviously that ensemble cast that all vie for everybody's attention. And yeah, it's at the moment it's my number three just because it has that place in my heart.
It's a good mention.
Yeah,
I think it's one of the best that he's done it as well, to be fair. So yeah.
yeah.
Number two.
Number two, similar to Pulp Fiction, doesn't always stay in my top five, and I think the reason it's creeped into the top five lately is that I got the honor of actually teaching this to one because I'm and that's another thing. I'm a teacher. I'm currently a high school teacher, even though sometimes still dabble in the film work here and there. And like this film, is a great one to do with a like in Scotland you have hires. It's like a higher class. That's like the equivalent of A levels in
Yeah.
England. So you know a good senior class you can do this film with, where you wouldn't dare try it with a because teenagers nowadays it's that attention span thing. But if you have a really good class, The Godfather, the first Godfather film, and
Okay.
yeah, no, the very first one, just ha it's the kind of it's Michael's journey from where he starts at the start as being this good, clean cut. Yes, he's the member of a mob family, but he is like the war hero soldier who comes in completely stranger, like a fish out of water, who has the knowledge. He has the knowledge. He's, you know that he's an intelligent guy from the start, but he's very conscious. He's part of a family where he knows what goes on, but it's this idea he's kind of comfortably on the periphery, and it's not entirely clear. Like I think it is open to interpretation whether he does want to get closer or wants to stay away, but either way, he gets dragged into it, and at times it feels like a Macbeth type
Mm.
storyline when you think of that. Again, Macbeth was somebody who was a war hero who praised by the king, the Scottish king Duncan, where I suppose you could see he's like you know, a, a cipher for Vito Corleone, and Vito Corleone reveres Michael, even though he's the youngest. He's the one that's not really in the business. He's not really in that, but he still
Mm.
loves him, and that's the crux of the film. It's a father-son relationship. There is all this mobster threads going on around about it. And I guess, to a degree, all of that does carry the film. And I think that the thing I love about it, and I think it's because it's through teaching it, which is why I've really grasped onto it, is that it has so much subtext and so much things that you can read like a novel. I'm a stupid thing to say because it was a novel to begin with, but I think that the film version took on a sort of different sort of power when the way it used its mise en scène just means literally everything in the scene. And I actually was lucky enough to do the Godfather tour last summer. I went to Sicily to do it, and the guy that was running that is a big Godfather expert, and he mentioned that you've got things like the fish, like when Luca Brasi goes to the place where he ends up getting garroted. And there is
Wow.
actually the door he goes in, it's got there's a Pisces, so it's like the double
Mhm.
fish is on the door. So okay, all my students and myself, pretty obvious, he is going to die, and it's going to be something to do with fishes, sleeping with the fishes. But when I went on this tour last year, the apparently the true mise en scène clue that something bad's going to happen, and this is actually true in the mafia world, the real mafia world, is oranges. So like
Yeah.
it's Vito Corleone goes to buy oranges, then he gets shot. He's playing with the oranges in the little sort of well, not orchard, but whatever the orange
In his
equivalent of an
farm
orchard would
way
be.
before he
He's
dies
playing.
there.
He basically stuffs it in his mouth, and I'm thinking now knowing that that's basically a death sentence. And then in all the other two Godfather films as well, there is like donkey carts with oranges going past, and then it might just be right before something bad happened. So like I love that the fact that this film had these intentional cues, which apparently were historically relevant, and it's it's just really without obviously giving to all. I mean, I'm sorry for any spoilers that I've given away in this little
Don't worry
chat.
about it. It's
You
about
know,
40, 50 years old.
it's just so it's like I haven't given everything away about it, and it's the idea that the film is very much a filmmaker's film. It's one that I think people should study, and it's interesting enough that especially a film that is 2.5 hours plus hours long, that if teenagers, especially the ones that are interested in film, can gravitate to that with because you say that attention span nowadays is going down in the young generations, but that
Mm.
film is able to even bring people in from of that generation as well. I think that shows why it might be in a lot of top, like it might be number one or it might be near the top of many people's lists. And I think for me, it was I maybe would have had it in the top 10, but not necessarily top five. And I think it's just because of that the power that it has over like it's very timeless
Mm.
and that Shakespearean storyline it just makes it so engaging and like there's nothing wrong with Godfather Part 2. There's a lot of people say that the sequel is superior. I personally just feel that the first one just hits all the beats hits all the markers just right, and I think the pacing's just right in that one. I just think Godfather Part 2 has some pacing issues that the first one doesn't really have. So yeah, no,
I think we've had this conversation before about which one's better, one or two, and I think we'll need a bigger podcast to discuss about
sequels.
not just sequels, but also the lighting. Godfather One is leaves a lot to be desired. As much as it's good for atmospherically, I think it's very, very underlit in a lot of scenes. But
Hmm.
again, honorable mention. I think it's a fantastic film. All that being said, but it is not your number one. So, what is your number one film?
Taxi Driver, Martin Scorsese.
Oh,
It's and actually like I just before I came on this podcast, I also just did a little check on like, what the current IMDb ratings and the current Rotten Tomatoes ratings are. And
okay.
of my five, it's the lowest of in both counts, but it's still in the eights. It's still in the 80%. It's kind of high. And yeah, I could totally see why that it doesn't really have that same draw as maybe the other four that I've mentioned in my list. But for me, it's the kind of the ethereal quality that it has, that it could very well be. I mean, if you, I'll try really hard not to give any spoilers for this one, but like if you see the whole film from start to finish, it does feel like a fever dream,
Mm,
and especially if you interpret the ending the way you interpret it, then it could very well be that it is meant to be read as that. It's meant to be read as a dream of sorts. And like there's a lot of things that combined that would never ever have happened again. So like I'll start with the soundtrack. That was Bernard Herrmann, one of the great film scorers of all time, big Hitchcock collaborator, and that was his final ever score. I think he died during the essentially the edit of the film. He'd obviously done a score, and it was a non-typical score for him. It was a very jazzy score. I mean, he was known for doing very orchestral stuff, and I think the idea that Bernard Herrmann did something that was not the norm, that seemed quite like it's almost like it was a dream, like it would never happen. It was like that related to the dream quality. Like he's like, oh, I might be about to die, but I'm going to dream about doing a jazz score. And then here we go. There's a film that could be read as a dream, has a jazz score in
mm.
it. You've also got Jodie Foster in a really early child role.
I think it was a first row,
And
no?
yeah, yeah, I think so. And I think like she doesn't seem like somebody who's in a debut. She seems like somebody who's already mature. And actually, like seeing her later films, which not all of them have been as well received, like that, I think she's always had this adult way of performing.
Mm,
I mean, I guess there's an element to it because she is meant to be a child prostitute. It's a kind of forced adulthood in that element, but she's very captivating, not in a male gaze kind of way, and then certainly not been read in a way where Travis, the main character played by Robert De Niro, sees her as that.
yeah,
But it's this idea that it's a kind of, it's almost like a little it might there's a buddy movie elements to it in a kind of twisted way. There's a kind of like that kind of man on fire is have I got that right with
yeah,
Denzel and Dakota, and then it's kind of like that to a degree at points where they're sitting in the cafe, and but she's kind of very mature sounding, yet she's still naive. This idea that she's been thrust into this world. She did run away from home, but then you've got a man who's really deranged and really twisted. And there are times in the film where like you really don't root for him at all. I mean, like there is a suggestion that he might have racist inclinations himself, and I'm thinking there's those moments where you kind of it takes you out a bit, and you kind of you're meant. And I've done a lot of research in the film itself. I think he is meant to be read as an anti, both a anti-hero and an anti-villain. He's meant to be a bit of both. And like and yes, there is kind of links to the whole, I forget the name of the guy, but the guy that shot Reagan, that
yeah,
maybe
yeah,
there is a kind of comparison that that he's meant to be like a parable of that, a cipher of that. But like for me, the thing I liked about him and the character that Paul Schrader, the screenwriter, created, because Paul Schrader himself was a Vietnam survivor, and he
hmm
basically channeled himself into this Vietnam character of Travis Bickle, who's basically has been made to be the lowest of the low, and he's doing a job which he is very, very low working class, and he is picking up some really really shady characters. And it's this idea where even he his twisted mind is sometimes taken aback. Like obviously Martin Scorsese has a very memorable cameo in it himself. And
Mm.
it's the fact that Travis Bickle does not say a word during this scene. And well, even though Martin Scorsese, the character and the director both are saying, yeah, yeah, don't say anything, and it's just this the acting is done a lot from like Robert De Niro's eyes right through the film. Yes, he's got the "you talking to me" and he's got these kind of iconic moments, but it's the non-action. It's the thing I liked about some aspects of Pulp Fiction where it's the thing that draw me in is the what he doesn't say. He maybe wants to say some really horrible things or wants to say he maybe does have some repressed sexual urges towards Jodie Foster, the minor character. He certainly
Mm.
does for Sybil Shepherd. He's obviously
Yeah.
does lust after Sybil Shepherd for a while, and he does stalk her to a degree for a bit. And I think it's this idea that, and I like the comparison to the Chris Christopherson song where like the lyric, where he's like a walking contradiction, and for me, calling him God's lonely man, like that. There's times when I feel not not in the sense of the things I've mentioned, this kind of twisted side of him, but like there's times when I feel very Travis Bickle, where like in I mean, I've never really been working class. I've always been quite lucky in life, but there's where I feel out of step with the world around me,
Mm.
and I think that's the relatable part. It's this idea that there's a kind of survivor's guilt or a survivor's kind of psyche. I mean, I've not been through war, I've not been through trauma, but there's times where I can feel quite alone in life, and it can be read as a mental health, mental illness kind of film. And I know that the films like the Joker, the Joaquin Phoenix Jokers have had obvious comparisons, and it does actually show up as a film that's playing when the
Mm.
riot and Joker breaks out. So there is obvious comparisons there, and it's like I relate to it on a deeper level. It's a psychological level that the whole film and the character of Travis Bickle just really speaks to me, without me doing half of the crazy things he ends up doing in the film. And but then I think the idea is it should be read kind of dreamlike, where I can sometimes have very vivid dreams where it's not so much the entire dream is the same from start to finish. It's like episodes. You jump from one thing to the other, and he jumping from him stalking Sybil Shepherd to then he's picking up all these really shady characters, including Mark Scorsese. Then he picks up the politician who he gets the idea of maybe taking a shot at, and then eventually this child prostitute who's kind of there. He sees her, and then he picks her up. And for a while you're just thinking, okay, he's just picking a bunch of people up. He might he's gonna maybe become an assassin, and then bizarrely by the end of it, it becomes a kind of a sort of action finale where he's dragged into this situation, whether willingly or not, that he's then now going into to in his eyes try and rescue um this other soul. It's like I guess the idea is that he's such so twisted and so tortured and broken to the point that he almost does succeed in his other plot, which I've kind of hinted at already, but he doesn't
Mm.
quite get there. And then to me, I read it as a happy ending. The ending
Oh,
itself, like I read it
no
as a,
spoilers on the ending.
yeah, I read it as a happy ending. I do believe what I believe about what could be going through his head or the viewers' heads. And again, it is tied into this idea of it maybe being a dream or maybe being. I really don't want to say it because it will give that sort of ending away. Like it could be like he's kind of coming out of himself. I mean,
Mm.
there's definitely an obvious shot, a kind of bird's eye shot that comes out of that final scene that really does make me think, okay, that the characters moving in a certain direction, whether it be up or down, and then and that like, but then it makes me think, has the whole film really just been like that? Because this idea that it moves from so many different set pieces, some small, some big, and it's just it's like a pick and mix of all my favorite sweets, like all the things I really look for in a film. Like when I go to like a sweetie shop, and you have all those old fashioned little spades with the different sweets, and
Mm.
it's like it's picked out everything that I would look for in a character, look for in a film, and it doesn't need to necessarily be entertainment per se. It's just it just spoke to me on a really deep level, psychologically mainly, and I just as gritty and downbeat as it is, I just love it. It's forever it'll be my top number one. The Star Wars geek will always favor Taxi Driver just because it brings it back to the why I brought up these five is that it's the transformative side of it, it's the experience of it that makes films like these five stay where they are. It's that cinema should be something that is it switches you off from the life you're living yourself, and it can, in a good way or a bad way, it just takes you out of yourself, and
Yeah,
you can actually sometimes forget you're watching a film. You're not going to say you're watching real life, but it's that you get drawn into it so much that
yeah.
it's like you're having the most comfortable dream, and I don't want people to go away thinking what kind of psyche do I have that Taxi Driver's
No.
my apex of a dream is the entire Taxi Driver film, but unashamedly I always select it as my number one, and yeah, the obvious reasons: performances, direction, whatnot. But for me, it's the ethereal quality and the fact that it takes me out and speaks to me. I think that, and it's
Yeah,
back to it being I think it's a subjective thing. Asking anybody to choose their top five is entirely subjective. Same as making
100%.
your Oscar choices as well. It's totally subjective.
Yeah, and like I say, I think if it resonates with you, it resonates with you. It's an art form. These films, and all of them are fantastic in their own right. And if the character resonates with you, if the story resonates with you, if the themes resonates with you, I think because I haven't seen Taxi Driver in a long while, I just recognize the alienation from society within the 70s when it was shot.
Yep.
And almost that similar sort of thing is going on now, where there's kind of almost an alienation from society,
Yes.
whether it be young men are feeling alienated or people feeling alienated politically
Hmm.
or within their own culture, within their own family. So it's just various different forms of alienation from the norm. And I think most people will resonate with that, even if they
Hmm.
might not necessarily like some of the things that the character does, to be fair to you. So, yeah, I'm with you.
Exactly.
So, just to round up, your top five was Taxi Driver, Godfather Part 1, 12 Angry Men, Pan's Labyrinth, and I'm missing one.
Pulp Fiction. Yeah.
Pulp Fiction. How could I miss Pulp Fiction? And there we
Yeah.
have it. Colin's top five.
Yeah.